I think that this distinction between offensive and defensive is a bit strange. Allies are providing a wide range of different weapon systems, both Soviet-era systems, but also modern equipment, because we speak about providing weapons to a country which is defending itself. And self-defense is a right which is enshrined in the UN Charter. So everything Ukraine does with the support from NATO allies is defensive.
Everything or anything, Mr. Secretary General. This NATO ally support, without Ukraine itself currently as a member, appears to be judged by a different set of rules, while receiving a NATO pardon for alleged war crimes. When the bloodied corpse of a Ukrainian mayor is found following his kidnapping, and another Ukrainian official is executed while literally acting as peacemaker, some observers were left wondering if these actions were justified or just another sign of the decaying character of Ukraine's top officials.
Новий серіал «Слуга народу». Це його спільний проєкт із телеканалом 1+1. Головний герой, якого грає Володимир Зеленський, простий вчитель, що раптово став президентом України.
И всем по, понимаешь, всем по, мне по, нам всем по, не по на маленький, понимаешь, а здоровый такой, по, пришел нам всем. А меня бы на одну неделю туда отправили. Если бы можно было, я бы устроил. Кортежи, на, льготы ваши, на, дачи, на, всех вас, сука, на. Чтобы простой учитель жил как президент, а президент этот жил как учитель.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a man who goes from a stage and film comedic actor to a president in a suit and tie to a war president boldly walking around in military green t-shirts with Freemasonic symbolism.
It can be tomorrow at their houses.
You're saying if Russia will do this here,
I don't know.
it might do it tomorrow in the rest of
Why
Europe.
no? Why not?
The next day attack America.
Why not? I don't know why not. Speak about NATO with us. Propose us. We have war. They don't want to make us free. Yes, to be the independent country.
The Ukrainian president has already been given an interesting accolade as he received the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award in late April of 22. Yes, Zelenskyy is a hero for democracy, according to his supporters, while some people within Ukraine may say something very different.
В 17-м это было объявлено уже, что он не просто не идет, а у него есть такие мысли. Я подозреваю, что он думал с 15-го.
There stood the matter of several $1 million, finding its way from a neo-Nazi collaborator, Igor Kolomoisky, to soon-to-be president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. This was all exposed in the fairly recent documentary, Offshore 95.
А якщо банк взагалі твій? Тим паче питань може і не бути. За інформацією джерел журналістів, переказування коштів ішло через кіпрську філію Приватбанку Ігоря Коломойського, ту саму, через яку олігарх міг відмивати мільйони. Нові документи засвідчують, що принаймні одна з компаній-очільників 95-го кварталу мала рахунок у кіпрському відділенні банку Коломойського.
Це правда, бо існує два Порошенка. Перший – прекрасний оратор, спеціаліст, фінансист, економіст, во всьому знається. Він зазвичай з'являється тоді, коли є камери. А потім, коли камери вимикаються, з'являється інший. Такий собі Петро II. Перший Петро Порошенко каже, я бізнес передав сліпий траст. А другий збільшує свої статки за рік 82 рази.
Opposition in Ukraine, there can be only none. Only weeks before the Russian invasion, a Ukrainian judge refuses an arrest warrant of the alleged corrupt ex-president Petro Poroshenko, accused of high treason and fleeing the country into exile. shortly after the disgraced ex-president refers to Russian President Vladimir Putin as a war criminal, while Ukrainian courts protect the president linked to not only neo-Nazis in his administration, but kidnapping and torture and murder conducted on Ukrainian citizens. Only weeks after Ukraine was invaded, the president begins to make some important changes in the country, declaring martial law in the middle of March and suspending left-leaning political parties, the very parties that serve as his opposition. This article mentions several Ukrainian parties, including the For Life Party, which is the largest opposition to the president. Then a consolidation of information was initiated when President Zelenskyy planned the nationalization of all major news outlets in the country into a single news outlet. From thisweek.com, Zelenskyy's information policy involves combining all national TV channels, the program content of which consists mainly of information and/or information analytical programs, into a single information platform of strategic communication to be called United News. Despite their pro-Russia leanings, the For Life Party in Ukraine are made up of Ukrainians. But because of accusations of traitorous activities, the Ukrainian president finds reason to silence his opposition. And if the belligerent fails to render himself silent, something bad might happen to them, as two former officials could testify to if they weren't dead. Over the years, political opponents of Russian President Vladimir Putin, determined to bring his regime to an end, instead had their very lives brought to an end, some quite violently. It seems as if the Ukrainian president may be looking to imitate his adversary in certain respects. A pro-Russian mayor, Volodymyr Struk, was kidnapped from his home and later found shot in the heart. Advisor for the Interior Minister of Ukraine, Anton Gerashenko, said that the mayor was kidnapped by unknown persons in camouflage form. The state apparatus of Ukraine, SBU, Ministry of Internal Affairs, Prosecutor's Office, and courts couldn't do anything with the open separatists struck him for 8 years because he had a lot of money, most likely from the Russian Federation. Mayor Struk, judged by the Court of the People's Tribunal, judging by all, he was shot by unknown patriots as a traitor to the laws of military time. A sitting mayor of a different party than the president is accused, kidnapped, judged by a biased tribunal kangaroo court, and violently murdered. A second notable death came with the shooting, execution of a Ukrainian negotiator who was in the process of talks in Belarus. Ukrainian politicians are apparently split on his status. Some viewed him as a spy, and many did not. The cause of death is something that does not seem to be disputed. It seems that the negotiator was killed by the Ukrainian SBU agents either while in custody or while the agents were attempting an arrest. The Sun News writes, "The government hailed him a hero hours after MPs had earlier claimed he had committed treason and was executed by the Ukrainian intelligence agency." Questioning or disagreeing with President Zelenskyy within Ukraine seems to yield dire results for those who dare. Keeping in mind all these actions took place within the first 2 months of the Russian invasion. To summarize, 3 weeks after the country was invaded, Ukraine President Zelenskyy placed the country under martial law. The president then banned opposition parties. At the very least, had 2 government officials executed, including a peace negotiator accused of treason. The president then attempted to amalgamate most of all news media into a single station. And after all of this, President Zelenskyy awarded for courage. Yes, some people within Ukraine may say something very different.
Leaders from Western nations have staged a walkout at the G20 finance ministers meeting in Washington in protest at the appearance of the Russian finance minister.
If you are one of those people who likes to protest at G20 meetings, you likely had some company this year, as assumed respectable and responsible diplomats walk out of the IMF and bank meetings and protest to Russia's participation. At the G20 meetings on April 22, U.S., Canada, and United Kingdom finance officials walk out of the event prematurely. This comes 3 weeks after Russia was suspended from the UN Human Rights Council. Some social media reaction quickly noted that Israel, who occupies stolen land while murdering its rightful owners, Saudi Arabia, who deal with critics of its government by chopping them into small pieces, and the United States, who spent the last 20-plus years engaging in torture and murder in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, were not even considered for suspension.
I would say for me it was discriminating, but I think for them it's normal because it's their country, they need to save their people.
Many African and South Asian students who had been studying in Ukraine say they've experienced racism as they've tried to leave the country.
Africans in Ukraine allege racism and discrimination at the country's borders. Video posted this week by a Nigerian in Ukraine and verified by NBC appears to show military officials pointing guns at refugees even as they raise their hands.
Coming up, heart-wrenching stories from Ukrainians who actually made it across the border and out of the country.
Bigotry, racism, and open neo-Nazi activity has been exposed for years by varied governments, watchdog groups, media outlets, and newspapers. This talk mostly diminished in the wake of the 22 invasion. However, even years before, when Ukraine was still backed by the Kremlin, these issues persisted. Although varied neo-Nazi groups have been inserted into the military's National Guard, the National Police, the Border Patrol, and even street patrols across the country, the Ukrainian people are not necessarily supporters of neo-Nazism. However, some racial incidents have had a way of being buried in mainstream press over the years. Incidents of bigotry and scandal. One notable incident took place during the first pandemic of the 21st century, swine flu, noting that the government, in conjunction with local police, were asking locals in the Transcarpathian region to report on people of Asian and African descent. The requests were later removed before the scandal could further spread. The ideal being, according to Ukrainian officials at that time, people of Asian and African descent were more likely to be disease-ridden with swine flu. Before these bigoted tactics could go national, as released by the Kiev Post, the information was removed. This type of bigotry would resurface many times over the years, but especially during the first weeks of the invasion.
The exact people asking the world for help is committing a war crime against Africa.
And war crimes, genocide, words used by Ukrainian officials.
President Biden has accused Russia, and specifically President Putin, of everything from torture to war crimes. Accusations that his own administration faced over a decade ago as vice president. Accusations that the UN Human Rights Council addressed in 2021. But it wasn't about the United States or the Russians, but instead the torture being conducted by what the report states as Ukrainian government actors. From the beginning of the armed conflict, conflict-related detainees faced torture and ill treatment by government actors. From April of 14 until April of 21, the OHCHR documented the detention of 767 individuals, 68.8% of whom were subject to torture or ill treatment. According to the victims interviewed by the OHCHR, torture and ill treatment were used to extract confessions or information, or to otherwise make detainees cooperate, as well as for punitive purposes, to humiliate and intimidate, and to extort money and property. Methods of torture included beatings, dry and wet asphyxiation, electrocution, sexual violence on men and women, positional torture, water, food, sleep, or toilet deprivation, isolation, mock executions, prolonged use of handcuffs, hooding, and threats of death or further torture or sexual violence or harm to family members. The OHCHR identified a broad range of government actors engaged in conflict-related arbitrary detention, including the SBU, various units often unspecified, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the National Guard, the National Police, the State Border Guard, mentioning the right sector. The government's response to torture allegations. Violations of procedural rights of individuals suspected of serious crimes did not take place. Torture and ill treatment did not and are not being used during investigative actions. Detentions are carried out only upon relevant court decisions, and detainees are kept only in official places of detention. This torture and assault and bloodletting were conducted by both government-controlled territories, meaning the Western-backed Ukraine, and self-proclaimed republics, meaning the Russian-backed Ukraine, according to the report. In October of 19, the Office of the Prosecutor General created the Department for Oversight of Investigation of Crimes Committed in a Situation of Armed Conflict to ensure that law enforcement bodies, such as the National Police, SBU, and State Bureau of Investigation, properly investigate crimes committed during the armed conflicts in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. The department started to function in January of 20. As of April of 21, the Office of Prosecutor General was overseeing an investigation into crimes committed by armed groups and other actors of the self-proclaimed republics. Many segments of interviews conducted by the OHCHR contain tales of black baggings of suspected traitors and terrorists. These people, these Ukrainian citizens, were beaten, locked away from prying eyes, denied an attorney, waterboarded, and forced into a phony confession. Silence, torture, martial law. Events you only expect to see in those other countries.